right, welcome to this episode of On Location, right here on the first day of the Africa CEO Forum that is taking place right here in Kigali, Rwanda. We are talking about over 2,000 chief executive officers convening right here. We have heads of states that have also been here. And of course, our aim is to be able to drive those conversations, bring them to you as if you are here. All right. My name, as always, is Eugene Anangwe. Thank you for making the time. And of course, our guest right here is none other than Isaac Foku, who's the founder and chief executive officer of Amahoro Coalition. Thank you so much for making time. I want us to first of all get to hear a feel of what your expectation is at this Africa CEO Forum at the onset of this particular gathering today.
Sure thing. Good to have me, Eugene. Look, it's exciting to be here. It's amazing to see 2,000 chief executive officers from the African continent gathered in the same place. I think it shows growth and resilience in the private sector that is in Africa today. I think meeting, collaborating, creating a network of trusted community of CEOs, and alongside government, as you mentioned, there's some presidents here as well, some public sector actors, and I think it shows resilience and where the continent is heading. So it's exciting to be here. It's exciting to see everyone. The opening cocktail yesterday was great. The opening session was fantastic, and for us, we're here to also network, learn, and build collaborations with other people.
Let's talk about Amahoro Coalition. I mean, what do you bring on the table, or you're the table?
We're the leg of the table.
Yes.
I mean, look, so I'm in the private sector. Amahoro Coalition is a network of private sector actors that are working together to have interventions in the space of displacement. You know, the African continent has about 45 million Africans are displaced. That's bigger than a lot of African countries. And what that means is that as we strive for the Africa we want, as we build prosperity across the continent, as private sector actors open markets and frontier markets and engage and invest in communities, if 45 million people on this continent do not have a place they call home, if 45 million people are staying in places where it's not their temporary place, then we need to find a solution to that. And also, increasingly, private sector actors have to be part of the solution to Africa's social impact problems. And so that's what we're here. We're here to, as private sector actors, also to say, look, we have something to do with this. We can do something about this situation.
Yeah.
The interventions we can have to create a more holistic space, because it benefits us as private sector actors and also helps the continent.
Right. It's a very interesting time that this sitting is happening here. It's a moment where there's a lot of global shocks happening. A lot of countries are actually looking or relooking their priorities in terms of what they need to work on in the sense of sustainability. A lot of times the private sector has been accused of just being profit focused and not looking into, human interest or, social impact projects. How can forums like this be able to spark that interest in private sector to actually go that direction?
I think that accusation is not very fair to private sector, right? I mean, the private sector in Africa are the job providers. There's nothing more social impact driven than providing jobs. And so I think that right now, the content's in a place where you're having African multinationals, you have African companies that are going beyond their own borders, African companies that are going beyond the continent. And I think that spurs economic activity on the continent. It creates jobs. It provides tax to government. But to your point, also, I think increasingly for a long time, private sector actors haven't engaged in social issues because it's been the job of, quote, what I say, others. So when something happens, the international community steps in.
Yeah.
When something happens, we depend on government to solve those problems. Yeah. Well, to your point about prioritization, resources are stretched. Governments don't have those resources. International organizations are reprioritizing where they spend some of this money.
Yeah.
And increasingly, it's up to us as a continent and the private sector capitals of industry that exist to do their part to solve these problems, because it's not just about, I would say that it's an investment in their business, a social investment in their business.
Yeah.
Because the more we can help to make this continent stable, make it stronger, make it safer, that opens up market opportunities for the private sector. So these are market-based solutions that need to come in, and I think increasingly you're seeing more and more of that. And the spark, to answer your last question, is that it's forums like this. It's having these conversations. It's sitting down and saying, hey, it's not CSR. It's not just something a by the way thing. This is actually something that's integral to your strategy. And the more we synthesize CEOs to this, the more they see others doing, I think the more they're going to join into the conversation.
Right. In the intro, we talked about the number of CEOs who are here, over 2,000. And we're talking about Africa, a continent that actually we've continued to, sometimes face some challenges in one way or another. And we've also talked about the role of the international community. What can we do, especially even in the cost of finance aspect, in financing projects that are aimed at, solving some of our own internal problems as a continent? Where has the missing link been in having private sector driven solutions to some of these challenges, especially financing of some of the projects that we want to be able to finance. For instance, climate change mitigation, sustainability projects, any of them that we've often had to look for the hand of those who are outside to come and help us. What was been the missing link?
I don't think there's been a missing link. I think it's a cost of maturity. I mean, remember, as a continent, we're less than 70 years old. I mean, the first country to become independent south of the Sahara was Ghana in 1957. And to form a political entity, to go through what we've been through all our issues, through external shocks and everything else, I think our private sector is just finally getting to its stride. Right? I mean, as I mentioned today, you finally have African companies that are listed outside of Africa. Yeah. 20 years ago, you didn't even have African companies listed on all stock exchanges. It was international companies listed on all stock exchanges. We didn't even have them in the stock exchanges, right? So I think that forums such as this, right, where you're beginning to bring people together, you're beginning to bring this CEO together, say, hey, what do we do about these situations? I think you are seeing more and more of for instance, the financing aspect where African companies, African banks, African financial syndicates are now stepping in to do some of these things. Yeah. And I think it's a question of time. And if you ask me, I think the glass is half full more than it's half empty. I think increasingly you're seeing more and more of that. There was a time when almost everything went to South Africa. Now, there's a democratization of capital across Africa, I'd say. Countries like Kenya, countries like Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Morocco. You have more and more countries, Ethiopia, you have countries that are joining in where there's private capital being able to invest across your own borders. And I think that's a good thing. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. But also finally, I think you're also seeing syndicates between African entities and non-African entities, right? And I think that also helps the capital markets of the continent.
Right. One last question. Yeah. What do you think this forum must ensure it addresses? What do you think should come top on the agenda, and how do you ensure that this forum is not a missed opportunity to fixing that you feel must be fixed?
So of course I'm going to have to be selfish on that question. For us, the point of this forum is that we are launching a campaign called the One for One campaign. We want to encourage African private sector actors to contribute 1% of their top line revenue toward the cost of displacement. If we can do that, launch it successfully here and get companies to join the conversation, I think that's success. Because currently 1% of the globe is displaced. And I think having African companies joining to say, look, I will contribute 1% of my top line capital to educate young Africans to go to school, to university. I'm going to send 1% to actually provide jobs and internships for this place. Yeah. I think it's a good thing. At the macro level, I think these platforms provide for me something that's very unique, which is what I call a trusted network. We still live in a continent where if I live in Namibia, you live in Kenya, I live in Uganda, we don't know each other. And I think at the bare minimum, before the deals, we have to know and trust each other. I need to know that when I pick up the phone to call you on Windhoek or I call in Accra, you're going to answer. Yeah. And if we do a deal together, there's going to be a trust. And I think for me, that trust efficiency is still so present in the African continent that African private sector actors need to fix that before we even go talk about some of the bigger initiatives we're working on.
Right. Isaac, thank you so much for making the time to speak to us.
Thank you so much for your time, Eugene.
All right.
Appreciate it.